Trump tried to distract his way out of the Epstein mess. Now he's gambling on the idea that he can just wait out the controversy while still hedging his bets and trying some new distractions. But Epstein's victims aren't going to allow it. Speaking of odd potential distractions, we're launching strikes on drug boats coming from Venezuela now, which I didn't have on my bingo card, but honestly, are we surprised? I'll talk about why I think this is more than a distraction, it's a political trap. Meanwhile, old communist allies are energized by Trump's seeding of the rest of the world, and all Trump seems to care about is having not been invited to the party. Welcome back to the podcast for the 54% of Americans who regularly vote for progress in every election and want to convince their friends and family members to join our majority. This is Majority 54. Ravi is out this week. He's honestly, he's moved to Italy for a year, but he's just getting settled in this week. He'll be back on the show next week from Italy. But in the meantime, you get me, Castaway style, just you and me talking here. So let's start with this Epstein stuff. Epstein abuse survivor Haley Robson was at this press conference, and let's hear from her first.
The president has said that this Epstein issue is a hoax, is the word that he used. Can we get your reactions to what you think when you hear him say that?
I'll answer that. Mr. President Donald J. Trump, I am a registered Republican, not that that matters because this is not political. However, I cordially invite you to the Capitol to meet me in person so you can understand this is not a hoax. We are real human beings. This is real trauma.
What does it feel like emotionally to hear that?
Devastating.
It's being gutted from the inside out. Not that I would know what that feels like, but I imagine it's the anxiety buildup with the depression and the survival mode, and then your nervous system goes limp and ironically is shot. And it feels like you just want to explode inside because nobody, again, is understanding that this is a real situation. These women are real. We're here in person. To say that it's a hoax is just not. Please humanize us. I would like Donald J. Trump and every person in America and around the world to humanize us, to see us for who we are and to hear us for what we have to say. There is no hoax. The abuse was real. Now, what goes on behind closed doors, I can't speak for that. What happens around the world politically, I cannot speak for that. But I am here with all of these women, including our attorneys, and I would be more than happy to meet with him, and I will meet him halfway.
So these women are real people. I mean, they've been trafficked, and they've had to go through the last 15 plus years of their lives recovering from this trauma. And meanwhile, what has happened? Trump has used them basically to try to win an election, promising all sorts of things, then not delivering on those promises, stonewalling on the list. And then inexplicably, this has never been explained as to why this happened, giving the person, at least the co-conspirator in trafficking them, Ghislaine Maxwell, giving her a better setup in prison. And quite honestly, quite obviously, dangling the hopes for her of potential pardon if she doesn't say bad things about either Trump or people close to Trump. And so when Trump was confronted with the fact that these are real people who we have now seen and heard from, and that they don't think it's a hoax, here's what he said about it.
There have been survivors of Jeffrey Epstein speaking at a press conference on Capitol Hill. They're calling for these case files, these documents to be released. And Khanna-Massie, who was sponsoring a discharge petition to get the House to vote on releasing those documents, says he doesn't believe you're implicated in these files, but many of your friends and donors may be, and he says that's why the Justice Department is redacting them and slow-walking the release. Is the Justice Department protecting any friends or donors, sir?
So this is a Democrat hoax that never ends. You know, it reminds me a little of the Kennedy situation. We gave him everything over and over again, more and more and more, and nobody's ever satisfied. From what I understand, I could check, but from what I understand, thousands of pages of documents have been given. But it's really a Democrat hoax because they're trying to get people to talk about something that's totally irrelevant to the success that we've had as a nation since I've been president. Even if you look at D.C. right now.
All right, so let's just forget for a minute that he just throws in things like we've had so much success as a nation since I became. Let's ignore that for a minute. Let's not take that particular bait, and let's just focus on the fact that I don't know, 12 months ago it was a Democratic cover up, and that, according to him, and that was the reason we hadn't seen the list, because it was just going to be so bad for all the Democrats that's why Joe Biden won't release this list, and that's why you need Donald Trump in office so that he will release the list. And now that he's in office and he doesn't want the list actually released, the mere suggestion that such a list exists or that these files have information in them that would reveal powerful people or anything worth the public seeing, that's a hoax. So just if we're following the quote unquote logic. So then let's look at Trump's attempt to do what he's been trying to do since he said he wasn't going to release the list, which is pivot to trying to get people to talk about anything else other than that.
Nobody's going to talk about, because they're going to talk about the Epstein, whatever. I understand that we were subpoenaed to give files, and I understand we've given thousands of pages of files. And I know that no matter what you do, it's going to keep going. And I think it's enough, because I think we should talk about the greatness of our country and the success that we're having. I think we're probably having, according to what I read, even from two people in this room, we're having the most successful 8 months of any president ever. And that's what I want to talk about. That's what we should be talking about, not the Epstein hoax.
I mean, big if true. If we were having the most successful period of 8 months of any president ever, that would kind of be a big deal. I don't think that's the case, but let's stick on what he's trying to do. He just wants us to talk about how great everything is. The problem is things are not great. We're going to get to this in a minute. Like when we get into the second half of the show, I'm going to talk about what he's actively doing to undermine the greatness of America in a larger way. Like not just like things he's doing that we disagree with that are bad, but through his foreign policy, just as a preview, through his foreign policy, what he's doing to shrink the influence and shrink the international footprint of America and make us like any other country, which is quite the opposite of what he said he was going to do when he started coming down the elevator all those many years ago. Now, in a response to this, kind of like in a courtroom, you've got to show motive, right? Like Khanna-Massie, the Republican congressman who wants the list released and has a bill to that effect with Khanna, who's a friend of the show. What he is saying is he's trying to be deferential to the president. He's saying, look, I don't think the list necessarily shows any criminal wrongdoing by the president, but I think it does show criminal wrongdoing by people close to the president, and that's why he's covering it up. So let's remember that there must be a reason for that. There must be a motive for wanting to do that. And Epstein survivor Shantae Davies gets into that a little bit.
The truth is, Epstein had a free pass. He bragged about his powerful friends, including our current president, Donald Trump. It was his biggest brag, actually. And while what I endured will haunt me forever, I live every day with PTSD. I live as a mother trying to raise my child while distrusting a world that has betrayed me. This kind of trauma never leaves you. It breaks.
So imagine, put yourself in her shoes, right? You've been traumatized. You have post-traumatic stress from that. You've gone through therapy for it. You're trying to raise your kids. You're just trying to navigate this world. But at the same time, you feel an obligation to others. You feel an obligation to actually speak up about this. And so you have the courage to come and stand with the other women who are standing up against this sort of treatment and against this cover-up. And you've got the president just being like, you're just put here by politicians. You don't really matter. He's being totally dismissive of them, which, by the way, is a whole additional trauma in and of itself to go through something like that. I mean, forget that Trump is president for a minute. Just remember that these are trauma survivors who are being dismissed by the most powerful person in the country, by the president of the United States, regardless of who it is. That by itself is an additional trauma being laid upon these people. And then one of the other Epstein survivors, who I apologize, I don't know her name, but she dropped a little bit of news that I would imagine, I don't know who it puts fear into, but it probably puts fear into a good amount of people.
And also, I would like to announce here today, us Epstein survivors have been discussing creating our own list. We know the names. Many of us were abused by them. Now, together as survivors, we will confidentially compile the names we all know, who were regularly in the Epstein world. And it will be done by survivors and for survivors. No one else is involved. Stay tuned for more details.
Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, we have this testimony from Nigel Farage. If you're not familiar with Nigel Farage, he's basically Mr. Brexit. He's this guy from the UK who, really led the movement and started a lot of the quote unquote intellectual sort of arguments behind Brexit, and is basically a right wing British guy who takes his right wingedness and likes for it to travel ideologically. And so he has become very good friends with Trump. I'm sure he's friends with Bannon and that whole world. And so he goes to testify in front of Congress. And Jared Moskowitz, the Congressman Jared Moskowitz, who you cannot convince me has not been Marcellus. I've seen them on a Zoom talking to each other, but I still think they might be the same person. But anyway, Jared Moskowitz is, cross-examining, or at least is questioning Nigel Farage about this. And Nigel Farage doesn't want to talk about it. He keeps going back to the subject that the hearing was supposed to be about. Now, as you listen to what the subject of the hearing was supposed to be about, and as you, if you're watching this, see them panning back to Jim Jordan, the chairman of the committee, who Farage is clearly looking to, saying like, hey, can you get me out of this? Remember two things. One, Nigel Farage has said at the beginning of this hearing that he can't stay that long because he has to run to lunch with President Trump. And then, so that's context. And then the other is just keep in mind what it is that this hearing is supposed to be about. That is the reason that Farage says he can't answer questions about the Epstein list.
List from coming out. You think the list should come out? You think we should know the people who dealt with Mr. Epstein, Mr. Farage?
I thought I was coming to a hearing on free speech, not process.
Oh, but listen, but here's the
And
good...
That sounds like you're discussing process.
No. Do you think the list should come out?
I have no opinion on it. I don't know
So,
at all.
so we have victims that were sexually abused by potentially people in power, and we don't know who's on the list.
I'm very happy.
Hold on, Mr.
discuss that
Farage.
with
We don't
you
know who's on the list. We don't
another
know.
time.
We don't know who's on the list. We don't know if the president is or is not. I'm not going to say he is or isn't. I'm just going to say these are weird behaviors. We don't know that there aren't other people in Congress that are on the list, right? We have no idea. Do you think the list should come out? You think people in power should be held to account for these victims who have been sexually abused and assaulted? You think the list should come out?
I think that I'm very happy to come to a different hearing where you talk about legal process.
Okay.
But today,
Will the gentleman yield for a quick question?
I will stick
to
Were
free
you
speech.
aware that he has already called for the Epstein file to be released? It has been reported that he has called for it to be released.
Oh yeah, right here, just to refresh your memory.
Yeah, but
I
yes.
happen to have this.
But that's not
How
what
random.
But that is not. Look, you can ask me if you like about
Do you agree
social
with
security
yourself?
policy.
Do you agree with
We are
yourself?
here- we are here to discuss free speech.
Hold on, it's awkward for your lunch after this? Do you agree with yourself?
No, it isn't at all.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I'm just curious.
All right, so that's what happened, and then later, Congressman Goldman from New York, who I think, if I recall correctly, is a former federal prosecutor, then he prepares to ask some more questions to Farage, and that becomes the end of the hearing.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Farage, thanks for being here, coming across the pond. I'm sorry to hear you're leaving the hearing early.
Well, it's not a question of leaving the hearing early, but I do have other things to do. Yes.
Oh, where are you going?
I'm so sorry about that.
That's okay. Where are you going?
It's not lunch, I promise you.
It's not lunch. You're not going to have lunch.
I don't think so, no.
No lunch.
Sad, isn't
You're
it?
meeting with the president?
I can't remember what the schedule is. It's
You
possible.
can't remember if you're meeting with the president.
I'm being very polite, and I'm not going to tell you what I'm doing this afternoon, but I can assure you that...
But there's the free speech hearing. You're not going to tell me what you're doing this afternoon?
free speech is one thing, discretion's quite another, too.
Okay. All right, so you're leaving to have lunch with the president. So, Mr. Farage, I have a question. Have you heard about the...
All right, so, I mean, look, let's put aside for a minute that a guy who had, like all the rest of these people, called for the release of the Epstein list when they thought it was an axe they could grind politically and it would work for them, that now he doesn't know anything about it and he doesn't want to comment on it. I can also understand how it would be rather awkward. Like, let's say he's like, yes, they should release the list. And then he shows up, for Diet Coke and McDonald's with Trump. It's going to be awkward. All right. So let's put that aside for a minute. And let's focus for a moment on the fact that the entire Republican machine at this moment, the entire elected machine in Washington, particularly Republicans in Congress, Republicans, the Republican in the White House, it's all set up to do one thing right now. And that is to talk about anything other than this. And the way you know is because of what that hearing was supposed to be about. Now, do you think that when he says he was there to discuss free speech, that he was there to discuss free speech being infringed upon by the government of the United States, which would violate the First Amendment of the Constitution, I'm going to bet dollars to donuts that he was not there to discuss that, because there are so few examples of that in the past. Now, there are a bunch of very concerning examples of that right now with the way Trump is trying to influence and coerce and bully and threaten the American media and the entire world that is journalism in this country. There's that, but that's probably not what he's there to talk about. He's there to complain about something that, if we're being honest, kind of doesn't exist anymore if you stop and think about it, and that is cancel culture. They ran a whole campaign on this, right? Like, they ran a campaign on, it's a conspiracy by powerful people who are keeping things from you and not giving you what you deserve and treating people poorly. That's sort of where the Epstein list comes into it. And then the rest of their campaign was basically, these people are uptight, the left, they're uptight, and they don't allow you, men particularly, to just say what you think, and they don't allow you to be men, and that's what cancel culture is, right? And they ran a campaign on it. And Mark Maron has a great bit in his new HBO special where he makes a good point, which is, he's like, maybe we on the left annoyed America into fascism just by being particular and being really focused on things being politically correct. And I think that there's a reasonable argument to be had about that. However, what I don't think is the case is that we are still suffering, I use in quotes, under some sort of cultural drive to cancel people for what they say. In fact, it seems to be the case now that whatever you say, there is an audience for that. And I'm not going to weigh in right now on whether that's good or bad, on whether some people should be granted an audience and other people shouldn't, whether people should be canceled from their shows because of what they say. That's not what I want to talk about right now. I just want to point out that they seem to have won that battle, right? I mean, like, Joe Rogan says what he wants and he's doing fine. People come on Joe Rogan's show and they're not canceled. People, Elon Musk, like 2 days ago, I saw just randomly, because when I do occasionally open Twitter, it just forces me to see what Elon Musk is saying, even if I try and unfollow him over and over again. He was saying something about how the biggest problem in America is depopulation. And I don't even remember what it was, but it was batshit. But it doesn't matter, because nobody's canceling that dude, right? In fact, it's the opposite. The people who they said were being canceled now run stuff, right? I mean, like, look at the deals they just made in order to approve a merger for Paramount. They had to force them into putting monitors on the news, right? I'm not even criticizing them for doing that, like criticizing the corporate side for doing that, because it doesn't look like they had a lot of choice if they wanted to go through with their merger under this administration. I mean, if I thought about it, I'd probably have criticisms to make, but that's not what the point of this is. The point is, they've won that battle. Why are they still having hearings on this thing? It's like, we're not talking about the ozone layer anymore. Like, they may as well have a hearing on, like, how we shouldn't pass Obamacare. Like, they're trying to bring out the greatest hits, and it's really not working. And so I say all this to say, it is very demoralizing to live in America right now if you are consuming the news on a daily basis. But what is important to remember is that a lot of that news is driven by their efforts to get you to not pay attention to the things that are dragging them down politically so much right now. And so we're going to take a break in a moment. But when we come back, what we're going to talk about is the other distractions that they're putting forward, military distractions, and how they are potentially not just distractions, but actually political traps for all of us on the political left, and how we need to be aware of it. So with that, I'm going to attempt a live read of a new ad right now. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. You and I make decisions every day, but on Prize Picks, being right can get you paid. Don't miss any of the excitement this season on Prize Picks, where it's good to be right. I'm so excited to see Patrick Mahomes take the field this season. I'm thinking in that first game, he can even throw for more than 2 passing touchdowns. Prize Picks is simple to play. Just pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections. If you get your picks right, you could cash in. Prize Picks is also the best way to get action on sports in more than 40 plus states, including California, Texas, and Georgia. Prize Picks invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out if your lineup isn't perfect. You can double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. Prize Picks is the best way to win cash this football season. Which players are going off? Which ones aren't? Make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your takes into cash all season long on Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best place to win cash while watching sports. Join millions of users and sign up today. Download the app today and use code MAJORITY to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code MAJORITY to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. All right, let's get in. This is probably a news item. This thing with Venezuela and this ship, or this, no, it's not even a ship, this speedboat that was blown out of the water. This is probably an item that you saw a little bit about and may not have. You probably were like, I don't really understand what that is. You've got sort of an inkling as to what's going on, but I think it's important that we dig into this a bit, because I think that this is one part of a larger whole that needs to be discussed. So let's first go to this video where Trump announces that the United States Navy has just destroyed a vessel that was involved in narcotics trafficking in the Caribbean.
Come out, and when you leave the room, you'll see that we just, over the last few minutes, literally shot out a boat, a drug-carrying boat, a lot of drugs in that boat. And you'll be seeing that, and you'll be reading about that. It just happened moments ago, and our great general, head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who's been so incredible, including what took place in Iran, knocking out potential nuclear power for a long time to come. I think within a month they would have had it if we didn't do what we did. But he gave us a little bit of a briefing, and you'll see. And there's more where that came from.
All right. First of all, if there's one thing Trump likes, it's when they show him video of the military doing stuff. It's like his favorite thing. Shane Gillis's first special, I don't know why I keep quoting comedian specials today, but had a whole thing about, Trump and his first administration and how he just loved to see these videos. And so it's like one of his favorite things to talk about. We're playing it right now. You can see it. It's drone footage or potentially surveillance footage from something like a C-130 or something like that, or maybe a C-17. But I think this is probably drone footage. And you see, what looks like maybe a 30, maybe 40-foot speedboat. It looks to be pretty open, like an open bow boat. There's something in the boat. Can't tell exactly what it is. And then all of a sudden, it blows up. It's not, look, I'm not trying to make light of it. There were humans on that boat. And also, by the way, we don't actually know for a fact who the humans were. We don't know for a fact what their purpose was. We know what Trump put on Truth Social about it, which if we want to put it up on the screen, Jeremy, I'll read it to you here. Earlier this morning, on my orders, U.S. military forces conducted a kinetic strike against positively identified Tren de Aragua narco-terrorists in the Southcom. Okay, let me interpret some of this for you that was fed to Trump. Kinetic strike means an actual violent, like actual military force strike. And Southcom is South Command, which is just the area of responsibility. That part of the United States military umbrella. It just means like South America. The Southcom area of responsibility. TDA, which is that narco-terrorist group they've designated, is a designated foreign terrorist organization operating under the control of Nicolas Maduro, who, by the way, is the former president of Venezuela. Responsible, or is he former or current? I don't remember. I think former. Responsible for mass murder, drug trafficking, sex trafficking, and acts of violence and terror across the United States and Western Hemisphere. The strike occurred while the terrorists were at sea in international waters, transporting illegal narcotics. We don't know that for certain. They haven't produced any actual evidence of that. Let's go ahead and go back to it, Jeremy. Let me keep reading it. Okay, so, and they say, heading to the United States. The strike resulted in 11 terrorists killed in action. No U.S. forces were harmed in this strike. Please let this serve as notice to anybody even thinking about bringing drugs into the United States of America. Beware. And he says, his thank you for attention to this matter thing. Let's unpack this a little bit. Okay, one, if your purpose is to deter people from trafficking drugs into the United States, this goes back to why I previewed this as a potential trap. If your purpose is to deter some of these folks from trafficking drugs into the United States in this manner, I think you would be in error if you tried to make the argument that this would have no effect and would definitely, do nothing to deter people from trafficking drugs into the United States in this way, putting them on a boat if that's in fact what was happening and bringing them here. And I think, frankly, if you make that argument with people, you're going to lose credibility, right? You can't credibly say that blowing a boat out of the water that allegedly was bringing drugs to the United States will not be in the thought process of people who are going to bring drugs to the United States via boat. You can't make that argument, so you shouldn't make that argument. But let's unpack this the rest of the way, right? One, we don't actually know for certain that that's who was on that boat. We don't know anything about it. When we've asked them for it, they were very quick to release the footage, which appears to me, because I've, and for those who are new to the show, I spent time in Afghanistan as a United States Army intelligence officer. I have some familiarity with this sort of stuff. I did not do, I was not an image intelligence guy. That was not my job to run drones, but I was frequently in the room while the drones were, surveilling targets, and I was in the room when the drones took out targets. And I've seen what this looks like. It looks just like that. I'm pretty sure that's what this is. It's possible that this is something different, slightly, which is drone footage of an attack that was done either by a missile from a Navy ship or done more likely probably from like a jet that was flying over and launched it. Any of those things doesn't really matter. My point is, we just did something we've never done before. We just did something that is an act of war against citizens of another country in international waters at least not in a very long time, in the Caribbean. That's a really, really big deal. And you have to ask yourself, why? Why is this happening, right? Well, there's some obvious things. Yes, he wants to do things like this because it makes him look big and strong. It's distracting. He's taking a page out of sort of the Duarte thing of like, hey, we're not going to have trials for drug dealers. We're just, you deal drugs in our country, you bring drugs to our country, we're going to execute you. That's what the authoritarian leader of the Philippines has been doing for years, and Trump has been pretty open about admiring that. Also, look at Trump's background, right? I mean, Trump is a guy, I think he's lost at least one family member to drugs, and he's a guy who at least claims, we don't know, but at least claims to have, never smoked a cigarette, never drank alcohol, never done drugs or anything. So I think in his mind, he believes this is just pure evil, right? And you look, the drug traffickers and the cartels of Venezuela, they probably are. Like, I'm not arguing they're not. So what we know is it wouldn't be credible to make the argument that it wouldn't deter. Now I'm getting around to my point here, which is we don't actually know who the heck these people are. They released this footage. I've seen many times you've seen footage like this released. And every time it is, they tell you who they killed. That's how it usually works. They don't make like the Biden administration or the Obama administration, which was heavily criticized for drone strikes, and in some cases rightfully, and in some cases, as a former service member, I do tend to have a little bit more flexibility for the use of drones because I understand that when you use them, you don't put Americans in harm's way. So you can have that debate all you want. But when this sort of footage was released in the past, it was to say, this is who we killed and this is why we killed them. And this is what our evidence was, that it was them and that this is what they were doing. There's another thing in the Truth Social post that is important here. Trump uses the term killed in action. Killed in action is a term you use when the rules of engagement have been established, that you are in an active war. You are in a shooting war. Now, I guess you could say that we've had a war on drugs for a really long time, but but if you are saying that the head of the cartel was at one time the leader of the country of Venezuela and is still leader of at least a faction in Venezuela, that it's his cartel that you are launching the strike against, then that is an active war against at least a part of Venezuela. That is a huge deal. That is the kind of thing that Congress needs to be a part of. That's what my argument is on this stuff, is like, hey, I would be open to the idea that, kinetic action against drug traffickers, if you could in some cases be worthy, particularly if you can prove that it is also terrorist activity. Okay, that's something like I'm not totally closed off to. But if you're doing it without any sort of input from Congress, any sort of authorization, you're getting us into what appears to be a war. We've had all sorts of misadventures in the past with attempted regime change in South America and in Central America and Latin America generally. And now you're getting us down that road. That's the kind of thing we should just, like, I don't know, talk about as a country before it happens. And finally, I think in this case, it is reasonable to question why it was done as a strike as opposed to a seizure. The United States Navy, and let's say it were to go further, the United States Coast Guard, but the United States Navy, particularly with the amount of military buildup that is in this region right now, because Trump has built it up. You know, they deployed at least 8 warships and 1 submarine to the Caribbean. There are Marines down there. I've had multiple friends who served on the Marine fast teams, which do a lot of boarding very successfully. They're very good at it. Board other vessels underway. Usually, it's in places like the Mediterranean, but that's what they train for. They do it out of Norfolk, Virginia. They're very accomplished and they know what they're doing. Why would we not do that here? Like, morally, why would you not do that in order to make sure that it actually is who you think it is? But also tactically, if you're saying to me that this is a foreign terrorist organization that is got people on a boat heading toward our shores, and that this is all part of a much larger cartel that is targeting the United States, as you say that it is. And I think in some cases you can't argue with the idea that certainly they're targeting this as a market for drugs and have been for a long time. If that's the case, why would you not take the most qualified, most lethal, most effective military in the world that is excellent at doing, at boarding ships and seizing ships, has been doing it up for a very long time, and do that? It's strange to me that we haven't done that. Now, when I said earlier that as somebody who was a quote unquote troop, that I do have more sympathy maybe than the average person on the left for the use of drones instead of sending in troops to clear buildings and that sort of thing. It's because of the nature of what Obama and Biden were having to use it for. It's a very different situation when you talk about a terrorist who is holed up in a compound in a hostile country, Syria or somewhere like that, Iraq, Afghanistan, places like that. Hostile now, Afghanistan. When you say, okay, in that case, we don't have the intelligence necessary to know exactly how to enter this building without having a high chance of casualties. We don't know what the neighborhood around is going to be like. We don't know if we can get in, get out. Anybody who's seen Zero Dark 30 or read any of the accounts of what happened in the Bin Laden raid knows that we were credit to the SEAL team that did it and the folks who planned it. But at the same time, it also did. I'm not going to say required luck. I'm going to say a little bit more bad luck would have made that a disaster, right? So when that's the case, yes, I think that there is a good argument to be made in many of those cases for a drone strike or the use of air power to conduct that. In this case, they're just out in the middle of the ocean, and we've got 8 warships there. Why would we not try to capture them and capture the drugs and get the evidence? As a former intelligence officer, what I want to know is, why would, if I were there working in intelligence in the Navy and deployed to that area of responsibility, I would want to know why I was denied the opportunity to have my interrogators interrogate these people, find out what their sources and methods are, find out from them. I mean, if these are drug trafficking terrorists, these aren't jihadis. They're not ideological. They're not gonna push a button and explode the entire thing to deny you the opportunity to capture them. They're not doing any of that. Okay. They're there because they're paid. It's how they're feeding their families, right? These are people, in my estimation, who would have been great candidates to talk. And I don't understand why we wouldn't capture them. If we are going to treat this like it truly is a shooting war, which obviously we're the ones doing the shooting right now, so it is, then why would we not take these folks prisoner and interrogate them, learn more about their operation. That's what makes me really concerned about this, and it's what makes me suspicious about it. And it should make you suspicious about it too. Now, why it's a trap? It's very popular in this country to be tough on drugs. Now, is it popular in this country anymore to be tough on, say, marijuana? No. But on heroin, on, cocaine, these sort of drugs, fentanyl, that kind of thing, yes, very popular and rightfully so. And Trump knows that, and he's playing into that. So that's why it's a political trap. You have to be very specific about what your misgivings are. Are your misgivings, like, are you upset that if in fact that's what this was drugs coming to the United States, that they aren't going to get here? No, you're not. And you should say so. But do you think that it opens up a whole can of worms and that there's a lot better ways to do this sort of thing? Yes, absolutely there is, which sort of gets me into the larger trap here, which is the use of the military for two sort of opposite things, sort of this odd juxtaposition. One, using the military for an expanded and I think troubling purpose, which is using them in the United States or to defend our borders in a kinetic way with regard to international waters around us and narco trafficking and that sort of thing. Trump has talked for a long time about wanting to use special forces in Mexico against cartels and that kind of thing. That is expanded. That is a larger use of our military and of, at least with regard to the way it's being used domestically, a very questionable use constitutionally. In fact, a court just ruled that the way it was used in California was unconstitutional. But at the same time, it is a contraction of how we use the United States military and how we use our military power, which is to say, we are, for a long time, we were decreasing the aid that we were sending to Ukraine. Now we are doing it through NATO, which we'll get into later, which is a contraction of what we were doing. We'll do things like support, a raid in Iran, and then Trump will take credit for it. But you don't see him, and I'm not saying we should be deploying the military to all these other places, but this is new, what we're doing, and it is a trap because it's for a very specific reason. I'll go back to something I talked about, a few weeks ago, which is that the American public supports the American military. It's a big thing that we learned after Vietnam. There is support for the soldier, if not always support for the mission, right? And at the same time, the American military does, or the American public does overwhelmingly, even when there are misgivings and there are people who have different experiences, as a whole, on the majority, does want to at least trust and admire law enforcement. There is a desire to do that. Even if it doesn't always come to fruition, even if you're a person who's like, I don't like cops, I don't trust cops, you are at least somebody who wants to. You will feel safer in a world when that is the case. So what is Trump doing in DC right now? He's using the American military to pick up trash, which is not something the National Guard needs to do. And then what he's claiming is that he's using them to back up municipal law enforcement. He's got them like patrolling outside of Sephora and stuff like that. We've talked about that before. But what he's doing is he's trying to put the military and that institution that is a trusted institution in this country on his side of the political ledger. If you look at other authoritarian states, that's what they do. Look at, for instance, Pakistan, right? When I was working in Army intelligence and I was working in Afghanistan, because it was a huge influencer on the region, we studied Pakistan a lot, and because we needed to understand what was going on in Pakistan because it affected what was going on in Afghanistan in a major way. And the truth was that the reason that, I think his name was Pervez Musharraf, I think, was able to take power is because he came from the military in Pakistan, which was, in what was supposed to be a democracy, the last trusted institution in the country. So whenever they had a political crisis, the military would take over. And it's happened many times in the history of Pakistan. That's still kind of the case now. That is like, I know there's probably a lot of people listening to this saying, man, I don't trust the military at all. Okay, that's fine. The average American does. And the average American sees the United States military as one of the last remaining sort of unbiased sources that they can trust. If a general gets up and says something while a general is wearing a general's uniform in this country, rather than a suit and a flag pin, they're just far more likely to be trusted that what they say is real. And Trump is trying to attach himself to that. And then on top of that, what he's trying to do is distract us by, now he wants to go into Chicago with the military, he wants to go into Baltimore. He basically just wants to continue this narrative that cities in America are dangerous places and you can't go there, because that buttresses his political narrative, and this is the whole Republican Party wants to do this, that cities are dangerous places because cities are run by Democrats. Well, cities have had higher crime rates for, forever. And the reason that cities have higher crime rates is because they have more people. And yes, urban population centers that, tend to, people in urban population centers tend to be more inclined toward policies that are not austere. And as a result, yes, Democrats are elected more often. But what he's trying to do is like A plus B equals 7, because what he wants you to believe is like, you can't go to cities because cities are run by Democrats, which you have to string a lot of things together to get there. But that's what he's doing. And forget the fact that it's him ordering the military into these places. What he wants you to remember, and what he wants the average American who's not paying a lot of attention come election time to remember is, boy, those cities run by Democrats are so dangerous that they had to send in the military. They're not going to remember, in his hopes, the nuances of who sent them in and what was actually going on and whether or not there was actually a need for it at the time. And what all this does is and a lot of people have pointed this out, and I think it's true, is setting the stage for him to be able to use the military more expansively domestically to get other things done, like to make people afraid to go vote, to, in some cases, maybe even try and stop elections from happening. Now, I want to go on a quick tangent for a moment and say to you, I still don't believe he's going to effectively be able to stop elections from happening in this country, because elections are not done at the federal level. Elections, at least, nationwide elections, are done at the local level. I say as a former Secretary of State, a former chief election official. And if he were to say, we're stopping the elections and we're using the military to do it, he would have to go all in to do that, which maybe he's planning to do. But anything short of that, just putting the National Guard in a place, trying to, say, he can't give a federal order that tells Massachusetts, which has a Democratic governor, and to say to their Secretary of State, don't hold the election. Can't do that. So if he tries that, with the conundrum that he will eventually run into is, you're basically going to have blue states hold elections and red states not. And I don't know if he's thought that far ahead or what it is, but it does give me some reassurance. Now, what I want to come back to on all this, sorry for the rambling sort of way of getting there, it's just me today, is what the trap is. Again, just like with the drug trafficking thing, where the trap was, they want us to take the side, they want us to look like we're pro-drug traffickers. So you have to be careful in that case to talk about what you think he's doing wrong and why you think it's counterproductive to anything that is meant to decrease the amount of drugs flowing into the country. But what you can't do is take that bait, walk into that trap, and look like you're on the side of drug traffickers, because you're not. In this same way, as you talk about the fact that this is unnecessary and it is dangerous to put the National Guard armed into the streets of American cities without a clear mission at all. And by the way, I feel terrible for the guardsmen that are put in that position. It's ridiculous. What you can argue against all those things, but what you can't do is take the bait and look like you don't think crime is a problem, because I don't care how much crime you have. Nobody thinks it's just the right amount of crime. If there is crime where you live, it's too much crime, right? Period. I live in Kansas City, where violent crime is a real problem. Do I think that deploying the National Guard is going to stop it? No, particularly because a lot of the violent crime that happens here is sadly retaliatory in nature, and it's you can't really say gang violence because it's not as organized as old-fashioned 90s gang violence, but that's basically what a lot of it is. A lot of it is retaliation. A lot of the efforts in Kansas City to crack down on violent crime, because we are not in a position to do much about guns thanks to our state government and our national government, a lot of the activity is focused on trying to find ways to help people de-escalate rather than retaliate. And what that means is, like, it's going to be pretty darn difficult for just a military presence to stop that from happening when it has to do with these longstanding relationships. And this, anyway, I don't need to get into that other than to say that doesn't mean I'm pro-crime. It doesn't mean that I think it's okay the amount of crime we have. It's just that I don't think this is going to do it. And I think that it is a huge distraction. And there's a reason that you don't see a bunch of other cities saying, hey, send the guard here. You don't see it because it's not going to help. And by the way, how are you going to actually, I know Trump likes to say, oh, now they go out to dinner in DC. No, they don't. No. In fact, the economy in DC is hurting very badly because of this military presence. If you've ever had a friend who had a small business where there was construction going on their street, and therefore they felt like their small business was less accessible and it was killing their business. Now imagine that there's martial law out there and how that's going to affect their business. Look at how COVID affected people's businesses. So this is not something that's going to help. So to go back to what I was talking about earlier about it being a trap and him not having the willingness to sort of say, here's actually why we went after this boat. It bothers me because it feels very Gulf of Tonkin. It feels like all of this is about trying to force a situation where they can do more and more of this. So let's go to this clip of a reporter asking him why we didn't take these people into custody. Why did we shoot at the boat?
Can you give us a sense of what the U.S. policy or what you're trying to achieve with the aircraft carriers, or the boats, I should say, in near Venezuela, and also the boat that you mentioned yesterday where 11 people were killed? What was found on that boat, and why were the men killed instead of taken into
On the boat, you had massive amounts of drugs. We have tapes of them speaking. It was massive amounts of drugs coming into our country to kill a lot of people. And everybody fully understands that. In fact, you see it. You see the bags of drugs all over the boat. And they were hit. Obviously, they won't be doing it again. And I think a lot of other people won't be doing it again when they watch that tape. They're going to say, let's not do this. We have to protect our country, and we're going to. Venezuela has been a very bad actor. They've been, as you know, they've been sending millions of people into our country, many of them Tren de Aragua, some of the worst gangs, some of the worst people anywhere in the world in terms of gangs. And we had some in Washington, D.C. We took care of them very quickly, but they're out of here. They've gone. But Venezuela has been very bad, both in terms of drugs and sending some of the worst criminals anywhere in the world into our country. They emptied out, you don't know this, but they emptied out their prisons in Venezuela, and they emptied them out into the United States of America. And that's part of the problem we have. We're getting them out. We're getting them out rapidly, but it's caused a tremendous problem. And Pete and all of the people that are working very hard to rectify the stupidity of the Biden administration, allowing these people to pour into our country with open borders. We are paying a big price as a country for the incompetence of the Biden administration.
Okay, so when he was asked, why didn't we take them into custody? He, one, did not answer the question. He just said, well, everybody knows that it was the thing we say it was. And plus, you could see their stuff in the boat. None of that answers why it would be tactically superior or tactically advantageous to not seize this boat and take these people into custody. Why would that not deter people the same amount? Frankly, if you are, if you're the cartel and you're sending these drugs to the United States, having the drugs be blown up and the people you sent be blown up versus captured, honestly, tactically, you're going to prefer that they be blown up because you're not getting the drugs back. You're not going to get any value exchange for the drugs in either case. But now there's no intelligence gathering capacity whatsoever for the United States with regard to the cartel because the people were killed. So I still don't see tactically why it makes any sense. Hegseth was asked the most ridiculous softball question about this on Fox. And, let's listen to his answer.
You too. Thanks for your service. The president put that video of him eviscerating, blowing up that boat coming across with all of the drugs on board. And the president said on social, on Truth Social, let them be on notice to anybody bringing drugs to the U.S. Beware. So the president is sending a message to other cartels, right?
A very clear one. I can tell you that was definitely not artificial intelligence. I watched it live. We knew exactly who was in that boat. We knew exactly what they were doing, and we knew exactly who they represented. And that was Tren de Aragua, a narco-terrorist organization designated by the United States, trying to poison our country with illicit drugs. Last year, under the Biden administration, all 4 years, 100,000 Americans died from drug-related from drugs, from the use of drugs, many of which poured in from Central and South America through our southwest border. Now, we're sealing the border, But President Trump is willing to go on offense in ways that others have not been, and to send that clear signal to Tren de Aragua, Cartel del Sols, and others emanating from Venezuela. We're not going to allow this kind of activity. You're poisoning our people. We've got incredible assets, and they are gathering in the region. And so you want to try to traffic drugs? It's a new day. It's a different day. And so those 11 drug traffickers are no longer with us, sending a very clear signal that this is an activity the United States is not going to tolerate.
Okay. Again, I don't understand why those 11 drug traffickers are no longer with us in the sense of dead rather than in a prison, in a jail in the United States, awaiting trial and being interrogated and being offered the opportunity to perhaps get a lighter sentence in exchange for telling us more about their operation. And by the way, watching it ain't that big of a boat. It's not like this was a year's worth of, if there's 11 people in that boat, it was as much people as it was drugs. It seems like a real missed opportunity if this is actually what you want to do. But it brings me back to the distraction of it all. So let me read you this article from Foreign Policy from today. U.S. President Donald Trump was reelected as a self-declared pro-peace candidate, but his administration is now setting up the dominoes for what could be a ruinous and unnecessary war, a bid for regime change in Venezuela. On August 7th, the Trump administration announced that it had doubled the reward for the arrest of, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro to $50 million. The United States had already declared Maduro to be the head of a drug cartel and sanctioned that cartel as a specially designated global terrorist, alleging that it provided material support to groups designated as foreign terrorist organizations, including Tren de Aragua and the Sinaloa cartel. It is worth noting the Mexican government has said it has found no link between the Maduro government and Mexico-based Sinaloa. Most significantly, Trump has reportedly ordered the use of force against terrorist-designated cartels, the very kind that the U.S. government has designated Maduro's government to be. It's not just that the Trump administration has lined up a legal basis for the use of military force against the Venezuelan government. U.S. warships have already been dispatched to Venezuela's coast, along with a significant contingent of U.S. Marines. Maduro, for his part, has responded with equally enthusiastic saber-rattling, mobilizing militias and urging Venezuelans to defend their homeland. It is no exaggeration to say that the United States and Venezuela are closer to war at this moment than at any time in the present century. Indeed, on September 2nd, yesterday, Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced that the U.S. military had conducted a lethal military strike on an alleged drug vessel, etc. That's the one we were talking about, which is a sharp departure, it says, from well-established and less deadly maritime interdiction methods such as Coast Guard boardings. Regime change in Venezuela has been a long-standing goal of those in Trump's orbit, if not Trump himself. During Trump's first term, the U.S. threw its full support behind Juan Guaido's bid for the Venezuelan presidency. Tensions in 2019 escalated nearly to the point of war until Trump pulled back from the brink, likely recognizing how domestically unpopular a full-scale war in Venezuela would be, including among many of his own intervention skeptic supporters. Now, I read you all that to say that you have heard almost nothing about the fact that we are on the brink of war with Venezuela. It has not been a big story in the United States. Unless we go to war, it won't be a big story in the United States. I promise you, it's the biggest story in Venezuela. If you live in Venezuela and U.S. Marines and warships from the United States Navy are assembling off your coast, it's the only thing anybody's talking about in Venezuela. That's why the president of Venezuela is apparently telling people, you've got to defend this homeland. Like every citizen is going to have to. In Venezuela right now, they think women and children are going to have to take to the streets with knives to defend themselves against the United States military. It's a big deal in Venezuela. And I bring all of this up to bring us to the final thing I want to talk about today, which, believe it or not, has everything to do with this, which is what's going on with regard to China, Russia, and North Korea. So put a pin in the Venezuela piece for a moment. Remember it because we're coming back to it because they're linked. President Xi of China, Vladimir Putin of Russia, and Kim Jong Un of North Korea, as well as Shehbaz Sharif from Pakistan, they attended China's victory parade. All right, here's an image of them together. Trump responded to this, and the victory parade, it's a huge military parade where they just show a lot of, their military might. You see this in countries like China. Unfortunately, we've now seen it in the United States as well. And Trump responded to this on Truth Social. He said the big question to be answered is whether or not President Xi of China will mention the massive amount of support and blood that the United States of America gave to China in order to help it to secure its freedom from a very unfriendly foreign invader. He's talking about World War II. Many Americans died in China's quest for victory and glory. I hope that they are rightfully honored and remembered for their bravery and sacrifice. May President Xi and the wonderful people of China have a great and lasting day of celebration. Please give my warmest regards to Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong Un as you conspire against the United States of America. So I get it. This is the kind of thing that people who really like Trump really like. This is him, like, it looks like he's trolling a foreign leader, but really what it is he's admiring foreign leaders. And then here's a video of what he said when he was asked about it.
We saw a dramatic picture where we saw the leaders of Russia and North Korea and China together. The first time the leaders of those three countries have been together in this sort of show of solidarity. You said that they're conspiring against the United States. What do you think they're conspiring to do? And given this, is it reason why you should slap or would consider slapping secondary sanctions on Russia if they're conspiring against the U.S. now?
Well, I've already done that with regard to India, and we're doing it with regard to other things. And I put out a truth last night. You saw that. And I was the one that brought it up. I said, they're only doing this. They're looking to, when they did what they did, I thought it was a beautiful ceremony. I thought it was very, very impressive. But I understood the reason they were doing it, and they were hoping I was watching, and I was watching. My relationship with all of them is very good. We're going to find out how good it is over the next week or two. I think that we helped China very much, as you know, when they talk about freedom. And I don't believe that, and maybe I'm wrong, I hope I'm wrong, but I don't believe that America, that the United States was acknowledged for helping China to gain its freedom. But perhaps that was just that was a sleight of hand. I mean, I was very surprised. I watched the speech last night. President Xi's a friend of mine, but I thought that the United States should have been mentioned last night during that speech because we helped China very, very much.
What was it?
Okay. This right here is the fundamental problem with conducting foreign policy when you think everything is about you. Because what Trump said was that was meant for me. They were hoping I was watching, and I was watching. And what he fundamentally doesn't understand is that he is not the intended audience for that gathering. The intended audience for that gathering is the rest of the world. It's for the rest of the world to be told by China and by Russia, and with North Korea in there as well, because they're, and Pakistan, because they each have nuclear weapons. What they're saying to the rest of the world is, hey, the United States is not the leader of the world anymore. Do not look to the United States to increase your economic power. Do not look to the United States to increase your military power or your influence in any way in the world. You don't need to deal with the United States. World trade and peace and negotiations and everything else, it doesn't go through the United States anymore. The United States is doing their own thing now. They're pulling back from the world. If you want stability, if you want aid, because the United States isn't giving foreign aid anymore, if you need a partner and you want somebody who you help us, we help you, look, here's who it is. It's this former communist bloc. It's which, at least in the case of North Korea and China, they are actually very much still communist. And, Putin would love for the old Soviet Union to be intact and for it to be, the guy was in the KGB forever. He's a communist. He just happens to have a better deal right now presiding over an oligarchy. But look, that's what they're saying. This is the same move that was done all those years ago. And what Trump is not realizing is he's leaving the window open for them to do it. He was not the audience for this. The rest of the world is. And he's totally missing this point. So let's look at what related to this, what Trump said when he was asked, because you noticed in that clip, he was asked, okay, well, would this cause you to increase sanctions on Russia? And he was like, well, you've already seen me increase sanctions on India. India, by the way, which wasn't there. Pakistan was there. So totally a non-answer and a refusal to increase sanctions on Russia. So what he said when he was asked about what he's doing to stop Russia's war on Ukraine, a follow-up to, are you going to do anything about Russia?
Soldiers and Ukraine soldiers, right? Not American soldiers, not soldiers from Poland, but they're human beings, they're souls. They have parents, they wave goodbye to their parents, and their parents never see them again. That's the end of them. Over a stupid war, and I want to see it stopped. Now, we have stopped the money we send weapons to NATO. They pay full price. We don't, Biden spent $350 billion so stupidly. And it was one of the reasons that this whole thing happened. A big reason this war happened was sitting right in these chairs, this one in particular. So I will tell you that I think we're going to have a good solution, but they're losing soldiers at levels that nobody has seen since the Second World War. This is the worst conflict, and it's just going on and on. It's one's defense, one's offense. The offense moves a little bit, just a little bit. You take a look, they move inch.
Okay. Let's put aside for a moment the fact that the guy thinks war and football are the same. Let's focus on what he actually said there, right? One, he didn't say that he's going to do anything to stop the war, right? What he said is that he's acting like he's supporting Ukraine more than he is, because he did finally come off of his terrible original thing of like, we're not giving any more weapons to them. Now we're going to sell them to NATO and NATO can give them to Ukraine, which is not the same. And he points out, not the same as what Biden did. He says Biden spent $350 billion, giving weapons to Ukraine going back many years. And that's sort of one of the first times that I've seen him actually give any reason for his absurd claim that this war would not have happened had he been president, and that it's Biden's fault that the war happened. So let's unpack what he's saying there. He's saying that because Biden gave weapons to Ukraine to defend themselves, that caused the war. Now, does that make any damn sense in the world? No, unless you realize what he really means, which is Russia should have just been allowed to take all of Ukraine, right? Because if you think that the reason that this war happened and is still going on, or at least that this war went for more than a week, is that Biden gave weapons to Ukraine, you have to, the only way you can get there without thinking that he thought Russia should have just been allowed to invade and take over Ukraine without any resistance, is if you believe that, I guess, Ukraine having weapons made Russia want to attack them more. Like, and I don't think anybody's making that argument. So that is Trump saying we should have never been involved at all. We just should have let Russia have Ukraine, and that's it. A democracy on the other side of the world that is, the front door to the rest of Europe. Just go ahead and let Putin have that. That would have been the right thing to do. That's what he's saying, right? So let's go to what he said when he was asked, okay, what are you going to do about this deadline that you gave Putin that's about to run out?
You gave Vladimir Putin a 2-week deadline to agree to talks with Vladimir Zelensky. That deadline is now nearly approached. Can you give us any indication of when you will make it?
Well, I'm having a conversation with him very shortly, and I'll know pretty much what we're going to be doing. We've taken very strong action, as you know, and in other ways we've taken very strong action. But I'll be speaking to him over the next few days, and we're going to see.
With who, sir?
I'm going to know exactly what's happening.
But
I'm not happy with all the people. You got 7,819 people killed last week. Russian soldiers and Ukraine soldiers, right? Not American soldiers, not soldiers from Poland, but they're human beings, they're souls. They have parents.
Okay. So what he just said was, he was asked, what are you going to do? You got this deadline you've set. It's about to run. What are you going to do? Are you going to actually, are you going to do anything with the deadline? Are you going to do anything different to Putin than you've been doing? And what he said was, I'm going to talk to Putin, and then we'll know what I'm going to do, because he's going to find out from Putin what he's allowed to do. I mean, so all of this brings me back to where I started in the first place. So let me go ahead and land this plane that I've been promising to land for you, because what I told you at the beginning of this was that I was going to explain how this whole "we're going to make America great again" thing turned into making America a lot less great and a lot smaller, particularly in influence, and how this is linked to what's going on with regard to Venezuela right now. And here's what it is. It's that Trump is taking us back to a place that some people would call isolationism. What I would argue is just retreating from the rest of the world. What were we doing before we became the superpower that we are now, right? Like just after World War II, for instance, what were we doing? We were involved in all these little wars in South America. We then at one point got ourselves involved in a proxy war with Russia and with China over Vietnam, right? That was a military misadventure that we obviously should not have taken. But prior to even that, we were withdrawing from the world, and we were only operating really in our hemisphere because we weren't a global influence like we are now. We had not yet grown into that global economic superpower. We were on our way there after World War II, but we hadn't gotten there. So we were involved with all this stuff in South America with Pinochet and all these other folks, right? And that's where he's taking us back to. And that's what China and Russia and North Korea see, is they say, oh, Donald Trump is taking America back to a place where it's not going to run the world at all, where it's just going to be a regional power in the Western Hemisphere, and where they'll try and exercise some influence over the Southern Hemisphere on the Western side, but not really much across the rest of the globe. And you might hear this and say, good, I don't want us in these forever wars. I don't want us in forever wars either, but I also don't want us to completely pull back from the rest of the world. And really the point of this is it's not like most of this has not been done militarily. Most of it has been done economically with his absolutely insane tariffs, which we're going to find out whether courts are going to let him keep in place or not. But every signal that he has sent since coming into office is we don't really want anything to do with the rest of the world. And that's why the rest of the world is looking around saying, hey, we're going to need larger influential powers in order to grow our own economies and do things that we want to do in our regions. And they're going to buddy up to China and to Russia. And that is going to make us a lot less powerful. And the result of that is going to be stuff here is going to cost more. There's going to be a lot more economic hardship. And long term, it vastly increases the chances that one day my kids or grandkids have to fight a conventional war against Russia or China. It vastly increases the likelihood that we end up having to send American troops to Eastern Europe to fight against Putin and others. And I think that that's really scary. And you should think that it is too. And that's the fact that we are now preoccupied with a potential war with Venezuela, and that we're taking these kinetic actions and these military actions toward Venezuela and in the Caribbean and in Latin America, as opposed to engaging and trying to help a democracy on the other side of the world, stave off an invasion by an authoritarian country that is our greatest adversary. I think that's a huge problem. And the point of it all, and what you should say to your friends and neighbors when you talk about this, is that Donald Trump said he was going to return America to greatness, but all he's doing is returning America to a smallness and to a terrible lack of influence in the world. And it's not, hey, we're not going to police things for other people. It's we're going to let Russia and China tell us what to do. And that's where things are actually heading. And that's really concerning. So that was quite a monologue. Thanks for listening. I talked long enough. I'm going to skip the one for us, other than to say, True doesn't listen to this show, but happy birthday to my son, True. He is 12 years old today. I just went up to his school and had lunch with him, which I think I'm relieved that I have a 12-year-old a middle schooler who still thinks his mom and dad are just marginally cool enough to let us come up to middle school and hang out with him during lunch, and went and got his little sister, and she went too, and it was really nice. So there are still wonderful things in the world, in your lives, and in others, and in mine. So thanks for listening. Ravi will be back next week with me. Please leave a 5-star review. You can find me at Jason Kander wherever. Tell me what you thought of me doing this by myself for an hour. And please do leave a 5-star review. Thank you to the Midas Mighty. And remember, we all have a platform. Make sure to use yours today.